According to PwC's 26th annual Global CEO survey, 2 out of 5 South African respondents believe their company will no longer be economically viable a decade from now. Therefore, building business resilience is a critical undertaking at this juncture. While this number is startling, it should probably not be a surprise. Local business leaders are dealing with a confluence of global trends and their domestic manifestations, resulting in an increasingly challenging business environment and impacting profits. There is a consciousness among South Africa's business leaders that we are living through extraordinary times with 5 broad trends: climate change in names, technological disruption, demographic shifts, a fracturing world, and social instability, which are said to be reshaping the local business environment. Now, all of these factors, combined with other major challenges like load shedding and transport infrastructure deterioration, weigh on the country's economic potential. The country currently sees baseline potential real GDP growth of 1.3% per annum over the long term. And in the report, Megatrends, 5 global shifts reshaping the world we live in, it was noted that although none of these 5 forces are new, their scope, impact, and interdependence are growing with varied magnitude across industries and geographies. Now, South Africa is making efforts to build business resilience against these long-term socio-economic headwinds, hoping that it could represent a turning point with growth bottoming out. To counter these challenges, South Africa is focusing on building resilient supply chains and revitalizing the economy. More secure and resilient supply chains are essential to the country's national and economic security. So from South Africa this morning, I'm being joined by Christy Viljoen, is a senior manager and a senior economist, PwC South Africa. Thank you so much, Christy, for joining us. Can you hear me, Christy?
Good afternoon.
All right. Now, according to the report, South Africa's unemployment rate may increase to about 32 increase from 32.7% to about 35.5% by the year 2030, and there's the possibility that it might even increase to 37.5% according to the report from PwC. That is, if the real GDP growth rate slows by about 0.9% thereabout. But then, does it all mean that the government is not doing enough in terms of job creation? And what telling effects would that have on the country's socio-economic stability?
Well, as a country, we've been struggling to create enough jobs for a long time, many years, and there's lots of factors involved. So we're not trying to really point fingers at who's to blame. What we're trying to do with these calculations is to look at different scenarios for economic growth and employment growth and contribute to the debate over where our country is going over the long term. Now, the focus on unemployment is very important for us because as a country, we have the highest unemployment rate in the world, also the highest youth unemployment rate. You've got people in South Africa that are 30 years old that have never had a formal job and probably never will have. And then we start talking about social risks and social instability. It's something that gets talked about by analysts, by big business, by government. There is this concern that we are growing as a society in the wrong direction, where we do have some economic growth, but not enough employment growth. And that's why it's a big concern when you think about, for example, businesses planning investment. Are you planning to invest locally, or are you looking for another destination that might have more stability? We need local investment to create those jobs, to grow as a better society. So with these numbers, we're trying to contribute to this debate that says unemployment is not going to come down on its own, or we as a society need a real solution to this.
Well, just as you have said, pointing, accusing fingers or blaming the government, as it were, also certain institutions may not really be ideal because, of course, we have different countries who are also going through these global challenges as highlighted by the PwC report. Now, looking at it from the angle of local businesses, MSMEs who are also going through the issue of climate change, technological disruption, demographic shifts, and, of course, local instability, is there a way by which these challenges can be forestalled to minimize the impact that these situational factors are having on the MSMEs in Africa?
So these factors that you've named, we call them the mega trends. So these are global factors. They've been with us a long time. They will be with us for a long, long time. And it's not able for an individual or a single company to stop this or change this. We as a global society need to address this. So the question, what about small business interacting with these factors? They cannot stop it, but you can be prepared. So we are always saying, when you think about business resilience, be aware of the risks and plan for them. So for example, we know climate change is a reality, and we can see floods or droughts materialize very quickly. If you are in the type of business where this has an impact on your supply chain, be aware of that and try and plan. You cannot combat all of the risks, you cannot solve all of them, but you need to plan accordingly, and that will help reduce the negative impact of something like a flood or a drought. If you're looking at technological change, it's something we cannot ignore. Globally and locally across Africa, across South Africa, technological change is changing the way we do business, the way that businesses interact with clients, whether it's a small business or a big business. So that means that MSMEs need to be aware of this technology, need to be aware of how people engage with them. Otherwise, the business is not sustainable. And if you look 5 or 10 years ahead, if you don't adapt in the right way, your business will not actually be around for that long time.
Well, of course, that is what our President Cyril Ramaphosa is doing. Just at the concluded investments conference in South Africa, he spoke passionately to a couple of investors who were there, who attended the event, and telling them how his government has initiated and implemented different efforts by which to combat the economic challenges that the country is faced with. And he also used the opportunity to see how he could garner as much investments that he could get for the country to revamp the country's economy. So in view of this and the efforts that Cyril Ramaphosa has brought on board, do you think that there are indications, as it were, or as you have seen, that the economy could turn a corner and could recover, and probably we experience a bit of uptick in terms of growth for the South African economy?
You mentioned in the beginning our economic growth forecast. We expect our economy to grow by 1.3% per year over the long term. Now that's a low number. That's actually too low. And it gives us an indication of what we're thinking about the ability of the economy to recover. Yes, the president has made very good points at his investment conference, where actually he announced that he's been able to attract more investment than he planned for over the 5 years that we've seen these conferences. So that's good. But we've had lots of struggles with implementing the changes needed to get this economy growing much quicker. And that's not an opinion. If you make a list of all the goals that we had in terms of economic reform, structural reform, the things we need to change and improve to get this economy growing, we haven't ticked enough of those items off. We haven't finished enough of them. And I think our electricity situation is probably a good example of how we are just not getting things right quickly enough. So we have lots of optimism in terms of our ability as a country to get things done. We saw, and not just South Africa, but across the continent, during COVID-19, the ingenuity and the creativity of people in business and the public sector to solve problems. We have the ability. It's just unfortunately not happening quickly enough. And that's why we're talking about 1.3% economic growth over the long term. If it works out better, if we can solve more problems, that growth number could go to 1.6, 1.8%. That would mean more employment growth. That would mean that unemployment rate would not actually increase. So that's part of our idea with looking at these different scenarios. To say to people reading our reports, listen, we have options and we have outcomes. We've got better options and worse outcomes. Let's try and avoid these worse outcomes. There are actually good ways that we actually want to go to.
Yeah, but then what are the challenges or the bottlenecks that you would identify as being reasons why you are not able to fast track the implementation of the structural and other economic reforms that the Cyril Ramaphosa administration has brought on board? What are those impediments?
Well, we have to understand that any system, whether you call it political or business or bureaucratic, those systems develop over a long period of time. And they change very slowly. And even with a concerted effort, if you want to change how a business works, a non-governmental organization, the public sector, anytime you need to make a change, it requires a broad input and broad buy-in from different stakeholders. You have to think of the legal aspects to it, the changes to different policies. Many of these changes also require government, for example, to have interaction with the public, with the people that actually vote for them. So part of the legislative process is you need to have public consultations. All of this takes time. And we've actually, some of these goals we've reached, as I've mentioned, some of them are taking a while, and some of them have been set back by the pandemic. We lost a lot of time during the pandemic, not just South Africa, the rest of the world, in dealing with changes needed to improve business, to improve job creation. As government, as private sector, as a society, we had to spend so much time on the healthcare aspect of this pandemic that many other things were left behind. So that has been one of the big challenges for us in getting sort of catch up, in getting back to where we were, because we have been falling behind. Like I said, not just the South African challenge, seeing it across the continent and the world. So time is something we need to find, and it is a difficult one.
So then, to revitalize the economy, Christy, the report postulated that there's a need to focus on building resilient supply chains along business operations. So how do you think the government can go about that? Because you've also mentioned the fact that there are bottlenecks, there's the time lapse challenge and all that. So what do you think the government can do to scale up conversations around the volume and the value of business and trade, most especially for South Africa, to the global markets?
So our two biggest challenges at the moment, one is the electricity load shedding. The other one is transport infrastructure. You need efficient transport to get goods to the harbour so we can export them. And also when we import something, when it arrives at the harbour, you need to get in quickly, gets transported to where it needs to be. Electricity, you're well aware of our challenges at the moment with not having enough supply and almost daily blackouts that we have according to different schedules. Those are the two big things that we need to fix, that we need to change, because those are causing businesses that actually need to create those jobs that we want. It's causing those businesses to have reduced operating hours. It's causing them to spend more money on alternative energy like generators or solar power. It's causing these businesses that need to drive this economic recovery to actually slow down and potentially look inward, not being willing to invest in new facilities, new factories, new production options, but just focusing on keeping the company going. So if we can somehow solve electricity and we can solve the transport situation, we as a country would be on a significantly better situation. But that means we won't solve everything in a day or a week or a month or even a year. But if we make those incremental changes, and if people can see the change happening, then their expectations improve. If you expect your transport option to be much better 2 years from now, you will start investing in being able to produce and utilize that. But if you can't see your transport option being much better anytime soon, then there's really no reason to invest in your company.
All right. Well, of course, we know that situations like this are not peculiar to South Africa alone. Other African countries are also going through their bouts of challenge, no matter the kind of modification that it is. But then talking about cooperation, just a few days ago, South Africa concluded its week celebration in Nigeria, where it promised to deepen its bilateral ties with Nigeria and see how these kind of collaborations can scale up economic growth for the country. So talking about collaborations like this, what do you think it will portend for South Africa, for Nigeria in areas of fostering innovative solutions and building some new business models that can drive economic growth for the Western region?
It's an excellent opportunity for many African countries if we are able to trade more with each other. We know that intra-Africa trade, in other words, trade between African countries, is much less than you see in Europe between European countries or in Asia between Asian countries. And that is one of the main reasons why the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement has been established and has been developed, so that African countries like South Africa, Nigeria, can work more closer together on cross-border trade, investment, skills, etc. So for me, the Africa agenda is most certainly for us as a continent to integrate our economies closer, to build more robust supply chains by helping each other out. We know that with the pandemic and with the situation in Ukraine, supply chains to Asia and Europe have been disrupted significantly over the past few years. If we are able to replace or improve those supply chains by relying more on other countries on the continent, that would be an excellent way of building that kind of business resilience, because we just don't know when current supply chain problems towards Europe and Asia will really be solved. So it gives us an opportunity and a strong motivation for African countries like South Africa and Nigeria to work much closer together to build markets and build supply chains and build these kinds of relationships, because then we diversify, and that's a very good way of building business resilience. If your development of your supply chain is more diverse, you've got less risk exposure to one event or one geography.
All right. Now, one of the areas that the PwC report pointed out was the issue of the grey listing of South Africa by the Financial Action Task Force, and that has been a major issue for South Africa. Though some other people consider it as not being too poignant, as the case may be. But then I'd like to understand what the government is doing in that regards to address issues of deficiencies in its legal system. And one other area is the context-specific solutions that the PwC report talked about. So how do you think that South African companies can prefer solutions along this line to accelerate the delisting process?
So there's a bit of good news on this front. The government has actually been doing a lot to get these items fixed. So the international organization that does the grey listing told us in 2021 that we have the risk of being put on this list if we do not make certain corrections to, for example, our legal processes. And during 2021, our government did very well in accelerating and improving these points. Some of it just took too long. So we were put on this grey list in February this year. The grey list actually means that South Africa is working with the international community to keep fixing these things. If you weren't playing along, you'd be on a red list, which is much worse. So being on a grey list means you're cooperating, and there's room to get off the list sometime soon, maybe 12, 18, 24 months from now. Now, in the meantime, for businesses in South Africa, the concern is that this has an impact on their cross-border business, specifically when it comes to financial transactions and contracting, etc. It means that there's often more due diligence, more paperwork, and sometimes an increased cost in doing international transactions. We are telling our clients that every industry and every business is different. Depends on how you transact with the rest of the world, where your client is situated, or if someone is buying from you, vice versa. There is no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points to tick off to fix this. Companies must be aware that as they do their normal business, these things will pop up, more paperwork, maybe an increased cost. Maybe you'll get more questions from a client on the other side because they have to do their paperwork. It is something to be aware of. It's something that will, in all likelihood, be temporary. But for the time being, with all the other economic challenges, it's something that local companies will have to deal with. So the importance is being aware and being prepared.
All right. Now, permit me to say this, to take you through biology a bit. Of course, I know you know that already. We know that living organisms, when they try to be strong and resilient, they metamorphose, they try to mutate to become stronger and to build more resistance. And so also, if you're talking about the South African economy, for it to build the needed resistance or resilience that it needs to stay above certain shocks and challenges, there will be need to come up with new, or should I say, innovative plans, business plans and models, as it were. So what flexible or adaptive strategies do you think that private businesses can employ, and what adaptive skills do you think people also can learn so that South African economy and businesses can be protected from futuristic global shocks and uncertainties? I'd like to just answer that in about a minute.
Well, we've learned some lessons from the pandemic. We've got more people working from home more often. They are often more productive doing that. So that's a way of reducing transport costs, reducing pollution, for example. On the energy front, we see many businesses, shopping centers, office parks. We see private households investing in solar energy. So a way of relieving pressure on the national electricity grid by putting up solar power, installing batteries, etc. So we're certainly seeing lots of creativity. As I mentioned earlier, we as Africans are very creative when it comes to solving problems. So bit by bit, it's happening. I think we just need to work more together at an industry level, for example, instead of companies working individually to solve these challenges.
All right, thank you so much, Christy. We are hoping that South Africa's economy will grow, even as we know that there are statistics saying that it will grow by 28.8%. And you have mentioned the issue of creativity. And we hope that the South African government can bring that on board. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, the Economic Outlook report shows that South Africa is determined to build business resilience against long-term socio-economic headwinds by focusing on building resilient supply chains, investing in learning and skills acquisition, and of course, tapping into the potential of informal economies to create opportunities for growth and job creation. And we hope that they'll be able to get that and get that right. We go on a short break now, and when we return, it will be time for international business stories. Do stay with us.